I would remind you that such scenarios have not yet been shown to be a factual reality. I would also remind you that Ted is by no means the only person to have remembered such details of areas like these in this underground facility in which abductees report seeing human bodies physically processed, and that very similar accounts have come from other people's conscious recollections as well as from hypnotically retrieved descriptions. If such facilities don't exist, I think that we still have a big problem in understanding the nature of this phenomenon, because we should be concerned to understand why such a grisly, horrifying illusion would be presented to so many abductees, and what purpose that could conceivably serve for an alien agenda. After drafting this initial report on the investigation with Ted and Barbara, I then became involved in the project that resulted in Taken. And this was a special study for me. I wanted to do a specific set of reports that had homogeneous backgrounds so we could make some comparisons and correlations with the material. So in order to have a more homogeneous group for the study, I chose 8 women from various parts of the country who had contacted me after reading Into the Fringe, and with whom I had begun initial sharing of information. I let the women relate many of their experiences in their own words rather than trying to take over and give you a second-hand account of something that in first-hand would be much more meaningful to you. And I hope, as the subtitle inside the Alien Human Abduction Agenda implies, that the reader would be able to immerse into these intimate experiences, which are so very difficult to relate without the words of the people who have gone through them. After working through the 8 different case reports and doing as much investigating as we could manage, considering the widespread geography of the women's locations, I then correlated the reports and the accounts and referenced over 100 different details about the entities, the procedures, the communications, and all the secondary events that make this abduction phenomena so complex and confusing. And I've included several pages of this correlation as part of Taken. There's also a lengthy comparison chart and an explanation or an analysis of the corroborated details. For quick reference, you can look through the small chart, and then there's a larger discussion afterwards. But the correlations that we focused on covered 10 categories: types of contacts, types of entities, types of physical exams and procedures, types of other activities, types of communications, settings for these encounters, reports on the bodily effects from the encounters, reports on external effects in the environment of the abductees, and after effects on the abductee, as well as correlating certain items of personal history, such as ethnic background, etc. Now, for the purpose of this brief presentation this morning, I'll only focus on a handful of examples from the reports of these 8 women, but I would like to identify them in their location. Pat in Florida, Polly in New York, Lisa in Alabama, Beth in Puerto Rico, Angie in Tennessee, and Jane, Anita, and Amy from 3 different areas of Texas. Now, to begin with the evidence of human involvement, 4 of the 8 women, namely Pat, Lisa, Beth, and Angie, have reported face-to-face contact with military personnel in a variety of situations. I think you will find the most surprising to be that of Pat's family's experience, and it is confirmed by all of her living relatives, and there are only a couple left after the length of time between the event happening and us beginning this investigation. The members of Pat's family in 1954 included Pat at the age 12, a brother and a sister, her mother and stepfather, and a grandmother, all living in a rural location. And they were part of the entire family having an alien abduction and subsequent contact by the military. One day after the event in 1954, in which alien entities took the family members on board a landed craft in the backyard of their farm in Indiana and carried out certain physical procedures. One day after this happened, Pat and her siblings that are still alive report that a contingency of men in military uniforms and military vehicles arrived at their farm, sequestered the entire family for several days. One day after this occurred. How did they know it happened? Pat remembers being drugged and being interrogated about the alien encounters. She remembers being told repeatedly that it did not happen and that what she remembered was not real. But this was not Pat's only encounter with the military, as she experienced another conscious abduction just 2 years ago, and this time she recalled the presence of a non-human entity in addition to the military personnel who took her from her home in Florida in a military truck to a rural location where an underground facility existed and where she was taken inside and examined. Both Lisa and Angie also reported interrogations by human agents and abductions by human personnel in which they were questioned and physically examined or underwent certain other physical procedures, which I recounted or let them recount in their own words in the book. Beth, who's in Puerto Rico, also recalled an abduction by human agents. And a fifth woman, Amy, remembered an altered state scenario in which there were both alien and human-looking people present in an underground installation. Although, as she says in Taken, there were reasons to doubt the strictly human nature of some of the men she did encounter there. They looked perfectly human, she said, except for their eyes, which had the vertical slits. Most of the 8 women in Taken also report the typical type of human interference signals, such as phone disruption, helicopter overflights, and other aviation activities over their homes that would indicate a terrestrial source. And I've even witnessed on one such occasion, while talking on the phone with Angie, an interruption and a comment by the human who was monitoring our phone conversation. As Angie and I were discussing on the phone a statement made by one of the humanoid-looking aliens in one of her recent experiences. She asked me if I thought the alien statement that their origin was somewhere in the area of Cassiopeia was a possibility. What did I think about that? And as we discussed this, a completely human male voice intruded into our phone conversation after a little electronic zipping noise and said, quote, "There's a lot of them out there and we know where they come from." And then he zipped off the line, and that was, So, it's not all secondhand information that I'm reporting. We do have occasions to witness this ourselves. There's also a number of reports from the women that indicate a variety of illusory scenarios, one of the points I wanted to stress today, sometimes involving sexual situations, sometimes involving prophetic dreams or visions, and sometimes clearly screened memories of real encounters that left them with false recollections rather than with the real details of these events. I'd like to use my remaining time to discuss the nature of the physical procedures, however, reported by many of these women, and these women are very typical and representative cases for so much of the material reported that never gets to you or to me because it's kept very private and very confidential. Because I think we need to be aware of just how physically oriented so much of the abduction agenda really is. In addition to the bodily effects you're already probably familiar with, including rashes, hair loss, eye problems, nausea, and for women especially gynecological problems and irregularities, the greatest area of concern, in my thinking, is that of the implants, the devices that several of the women, like so many other abductees around the planet, describe as being inserted into their bodies. I think the most intriguing information that I report in Taken, and that, in fact, I've come across in all of this work, has come from Amy's account of this altered state scenario I referred to briefly, where she was taken to an underground installation. She felt this was what she perceived. And I would remind you as I go through this brief presentation that in every encounter, the human's state of consciousness is externally altered and controlled in every encounter. And knowing the virtual reality capabilities and the screen abilities, we need to remember not to take everything as being the gospel truth that people come away remembering. Now, this has, however, been explored with some very thorough regression work, and so I do feel a little more confident in what I'm going to tell you about Amy's memory of this event today than I would if it were strictly her conscious recollection. In part of this scenario, Amy recalled going into the underground room, full of equipment, typically described from other alien encounters and other underground facilities, by the way, and seeing quite a large number of alien entities working here in this environment. But as I said earlier, there were also several human-looking men present, at least human-looking except for their eyes. One particular alien in the group that Amy perceived to be a female interacted with her directly. And this female alien began, basically, with an apology to Amy for the intrusions that some of her race were making into human lives. This entity proceeded to explain that she and her group were working with some humans to try to counteract what the rest of her group was doing to us. All right, so we've got to get the setup here on what Amy is being told. As the entity explained the negative nature of these intrusions for which she was apologizing, she then told Amy she wanted to remove 2 implants. This is one of the things they were doing to help counteract this negative intrusion activity, was to remove implants that the other group was putting into humans. And Amy recalled having an implant removed from one of her ears and another smaller metallic implant removed from the base of her neck, or skull. Amy was told by the alien several things about how these implants functioned, and she reports that she was not happy to hear that they could be used to control the implanted abductees in any number of ways. Now, the area into which the newer implants are inserted, Amy was told, corresponds to the part of the brain known as the reticular formation, and it doesn't have anything to do with zetas, by the way. Thanks to Marianne Friedman, who's here this weekend from Arizona, and who was wonderful enough to share a lot of her research into the medical aspects of this brainstem activity, I want to just briefly refer to this, and then on Sunday morning, Marianne is going to go into a little more detail at one of the mini-sessions, so I encourage you to listen to this material. The functions of the reticular formation that Marianne got me started looking at are staggering. And I'm sure some of you have been through this already. For me, it was just information I had to recorrelate with the accounts of the implant reports, especially those that Amy had relayed to me from her friendly implant-removing alien. The function of, I'll just read you a very brief statement from Nigel Calder's book, The Mind of Man, one of the earlier classics of our modern time, on brain activity and brain research. And here is a quote about this reticular formation area. If the primary job of the brain is to enable its owner to respond effectively to events, the strongest claimant for mastery is not the roof or the cerebral cortex at all, but the brainstem. The brainstem net is well placed to monitor all the nerves connecting brain and body. It knows what is going on better than any other single part of the brain. The brainstem net exerts its authority by sending out impulses which stimulate or inhibit nerve action throughout the brain and the body. It can override activity in the spinal cord. It regulates the signals from the eyes, the ears, and other